Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Savannah Tryens-Fernandes if you are new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Thursday, October the 14th. We have almost made it through the weekend, or to the weekend, I should say, not through. Almost made it there. So today, I thought it would be good to take a step back and kind of talk about a story that has been getting a lot of eyeballs this week and a lot of talk this week, and that is a story about Alexander City Schools, commonly called Alex City, if you are in Alabama, if you're from Alabama, schools that are struggling to feed their students with free meals. Now, this is kind of a multifaceted problem we're going to get to in a minute, but they did put out on social media to tell parents, look, send your kids to school with a snack, try to feed them breakfast at home because they are struggling to get those meals to students. Today, I am joined by our own Alabama Education Lab reporter, Savannah Tryens-Fernandes. She reported that story and has really been following up there. And Savannah, I know you've gotten a lot of feedback about this story from people who are in education world, people who maybe don't even have kids or don't live in Alex City, but are just interested in the topic. So I know I've got questions. I know our viewers have questions, but let's first talk about what is happening in Alex City. Why are they struggling to feed their kids?
Yeah, so this is part of a much larger problem that's affecting not only every district in the state, but nationwide. There's a food shortage because of, the supply chain issues that came from the pandemic and when we were locked down for so long. So there's just a shortage of food. And on top of that, there is a labor issue. So there are fewer truck drivers to deliver the food, fewer child nutrition program staff to serve, prepare, cook the food. So it's just a very widespread problem, a lot of components to it, and few solutions at this point.
Well, and you make a good point that this is not derived from one thing. This is a multifaceted problem. There is a food shortage. We've got the problem there. We've also got the problem with the supply chain. Now, that is the least sexy thing to talk about, but it is such a big problem because you don't have the truck drivers to bring in that food. You don't have the people, like you said, to work and to actually serve the food, prepare it, and etc. So unfortunately, it's a problem on both ends, which makes it harder to fix because there's not an easy fix, right? You can't just drop off a bunch of food and say, oh, there you go, your problem is over. They also need the supply chain to get back in order. Now, that's a big problem that I definitely do not know everything about. I don't know that anybody knows everything about that or how to fix it. But what we can talk about is the food shortage as well. Now, there is a lot of locally grown food in Alabama. There's a lot of farmers in Alabama. So why can't we use some of that local food, get it to Alex City and some of these other schools that are struggling?
Yeah, and we do. There are a lot of farm to school programs in the state currently happening. I talked to one farm to food co-op in North Alabama that's working with 4 districts right now to get to partner them with local farmers, which is a very hyper-local model to try and cut down on those transportation issues. But the problem is a lot of those products are whole products. So whole watermelons, peas that haven't been shelled, and you need the staff on the child nutrition program side to be able to process that. And when you have staff shortages, it's hard enough to, shell peas, slice watermelons, cut baby carrots on top of everything else they have to do in a day.
Well, and that's a good point. You almost need somebody to come in not only with the food, but who can fix that problem. Somebody who can staff things, somebody who can bring a supply chain experience there. Comment from somebody saying that they know people needing a job and they go put in applications, but sometimes things get lost in applications. You don't maybe necessarily meet the written criteria, and that's a job market problem as well. We know too that people are quitting their jobs at a really high rate. There's a lot of open jobs that need to be filled. So why are we hearing about this in Alex City? Why are we not hearing about this in other schools across Alabama?
Well, we are. So I've also reported on food shortages in Elmore County and Dothan City. Across the board, there's not a district that hasn't been affected. It's to varying degrees, but every district is affected. And there are a lot of job openings in child nutrition programs, but we have to remember the wages can be very low, a lot of them only offering minimum wage, and the work is really hard. It's not just, standing in a cafeteria and serving food. It's a lot of manual labor, it's long hours, it's a lot of rotating between schools. So a lot of things to keep in mind there in terms of the labor.
Well, and two, I think we can probably all remember somebody from our lunchroom growing up. I remember the person who ran our lunch line in elementary school, Miss Teresa. I still remember it and she ran that place. And because you have to keep the kids in line. You have to make sure the food is getting on the plate. If a child has an allergy, you have to make sure they get the correct meal. So, like
Mhm.
you say, it's a lot of work for maybe not a lot of pay.
Yeah.
Now, you say you've reported on this in other schools across the state. And it sounds like some of the ones you mentioned are in more either rural parts of the state or they're in much smaller parts of the state. You mentioned Elmore County, Dothan City, and then Alexander City. None of those are a metropolis, right? Dothan is the biggest out of those three. But none of those are exactly very easy to get to. You look at Alex City, you got to go down 280. You can't just get off from the interstate. Elmore County, same deal. You can go down 65. You still have to get off and make your way to the schools and to the county.
Yeah.
So is that part of the problem? These smaller, more rural and more distant schools are having bigger problems?
I think that is part of the problem in terms of the transporting food and delivering food. So we've heard from districts who have said their child nutrition staff has had to drive 4 hours to Birmingham to get food and then drive it back. So yeah, a lot of the food distributors are centered in some of these cities like Birmingham, and getting them and transporting them to cities to Elmore County or to Sylacauga, places like that, is just a little bit more difficult than to keep it locally here in Birmingham or elsewhere.
Well, right. And we know as well that this really falls into a category that kids and their families who are already maybe struggling, maybe below the poverty line, are going to hurt worse, right?
Mhm.
The kids who bring their lunch are not going to hurt because they are bringing their food from home. It is those kids who depend on getting their food at school. The kids who need it the most are the ones that hurt. And unfortunately, that's how it seems like things always are, Savannah. But those kids who are getting their meals at school, that's part of a federal program, those free meals. So what federally can be done to help this?
Yeah, so the US Department of Agriculture said that they are going to invest $1.5 billion into school lunches this year. But as of now, we don't really know how that money is going to be allocated, when that money is going to be allocated. They have done other things, like there are a lot of requirements that the USDA puts on school lunch programs, like you have to serve certain types of food in order for it to be paid for. And they've waived those requirements to make it easier for schools. But in terms of that and $1.5 billion investment, there's still a lot to be learned about how that's going to play out.
Well, and that helps on the labor end, right? But what about the food shortage? How do we fix that? How do we improve that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's not one source that someone can say, yeah, we're going to go to that source and rely on them indefinitely, because it's happening everywhere, and child nutrition program staff, if they find a source that says, hey, we have a good amount of food, they also have to be cognizant of, okay, we can take this much, but we also have to leave some for other districts. So it's just a balancing act that a lot of people are having to juggle, and there's just not a straightforward answer.
I want to go through some of the problems here and some of the questions we've got and kind of debunk some and explain on some. So let's talk number one about labor shortage. So we know that there are jobs that need to be filled for this to happen, whether that is truck drivers, whether that is delivery personnel, or whether that is in the schools. So let's talk about in the schools for a moment. So if a person is going to apply for those jobs to work in the schools, again, we just talked about how it's a lot of work, little pay. That's horrible, and we understand that. But also, are there certain requirements that people must meet? Say, whether that is an education requirement, maybe that is a background check, things like that. Are there different rules that people who are working in a school are going to have to meet?
Yeah, I believe every county will have their own qualifications on their job postings, which there are a lot of them. So if you just want to type in child nutrition program staff in Alabama, a lot of opportunities will come up. And on them, they will list certain qualifications. We do know that districts have had trouble even getting applications. So that's just been the biggest barrier so far.
Well, and then too, you look at the hurdles sometimes. People who maybe need a job and they are willing to take a low paying job with a lot of work, maybe they want to apply, but if they don't meet the background check requirements or other requirements put on by the county, they can't get that job. So that's a double edged sword right there.
Yeah, it can be.
So we've got that issue. Now let's talk about, again, I'm going to quickly step back to that federal issue we talked about. Now you said the feds are planning to distribute a large amount of money. They also have cut back on some of the requirements on food that can be basically expensed. We can say with that federal money, they don't have to meet some of the exact requirements of nutrition and other things just to get food on these lunchroom tables. Federally, what else can the federal government give the schools to make it better? I mean, I don't think that they can necessarily grow the potatoes, right? But what can they do to make this better?
Yeah, I mean, beyond a $1.5 billion investment and kind of waiving all requirements for schools, I'm not sure how much more they can do. I think at this point, I think at this point we need to be looking at what can be done locally and what can be done on a state level. Because with a lot of these supply chain issues, the issue is distance. And if we can get hyper local food supplies, it makes a lot of these issues go away.
That's a good point. And I like what you said about making this a state and local issue, because there's always going to be people that want to just blame the federal government for things. And that's fine. That there is a time and place for that. But there is also something to look at, as you said, state and locally. What can we do to fix this problem? Let's not wait on the feds to come in and fix it. Let's do it here. So let's talk about that. For the state, we've got the governor. I have somebody saying, look, why can't the governor use some of that money that the state was given that they're now using on prisons or trying to use on prisons? So what can the governor, what can the state government do to fix this problem?
Yeah, well, I think that at this point, what we're hoping to see is just a step in the direction. We've reached out to Governor Ivey's office, who didn't have comment for us and deferred to the Alabama State Department of Agriculture and said, talk to them. The Alabama Department of Agriculture said, we don't know of any state effort, and what we're doing right now is just a drop in the bucket. So I think what we just need to see now are these entities come together and say, okay, how can we work together to come up with a solution to this problem? Whether it's engaging more farmers, incentivizing, giving pay raises to child nutrition workers, something. But as of now, we've just seen nothing.
But that could be done on a state level. The governor could do that. The state government could do that and just haven't yet. Is that fair?
The extent of what can be done is yet to be seen, just because it's such a difficult situation, but something hopefully can be done.
Well, then let's talk about locally. You say that if the food, we'll say, is grown locally, there's a much shorter distance that has to be driven for food to get to the school, or for food to get to A to B, right? And that's a pretty simple, I'm not good at math, that's a simple math equation. If you've got a farm that's 20 miles away, you're going to want your food from there rather than the one that's 200 miles away, right? That just makes sense. So is there anything that the state, or even the cities and the counties, the local government, can do to say, look, can you open a farm? We will incentivize you to open a farm. We will incentivize you to grow X, Y, and Z.
It's possible. I know that there are a lot of farm to school partnerships already in place. And it's just a matter of, are schools able to participate? Do they have the staff to process the food that farms are giving? But it's yet to be seen what can be done, because there hasn't really been an attempt to address it yet.
It seems like a lot of these things that could be addressed one way or the other, I'm not saying it would fix the problem, but a lot of the things that could be tried haven't been tried yet. It seems like this is just a problem that's sitting, and nobody is necessarily making a huge effort to fix it on any end.
Yeah. Beyond the federal government's, influx of financial support and waiving of requirements, nothing else has really been done. I will say all child nutrition program staff are working incredibly hard, very long hours, to make sure schools don't have to close. And if something is being done, it is being done on that level around the clock. But above that, we haven't seen much.
But they can only do so much, right? It's like,
Yeah.
You look at then even medical personnel and nurses and hospital staff during the pandemic, right? They can only do so much. They can only work 24 hours in a day, and they still need hands. At the end of the day, you've got two hands. There's only so much you can do. So I want to quickly take one moment to debunk something. I saw it on Twitter yesterday, and it's bothered me since yesterday. And that is that a person tweeted in response to this article saying, do we send our kids to get food, or do we send them to be educated? And something that I think is important, Savannah, is to reiterate that there are studies, and I will leave that to you because you're the education reporter, but there are studies and there is proof that a hungry kid cannot learn. A hungry kid at school is not doing anything that's productive at school because they are hungry. What can you add on that?
Exactly that. You can't concentrate in a classroom if you're sitting there thinking about where you're going to get your next meal. School meals are about building equity. And in Alabama, 50% of students qualify for free and reduced meals. In Alex City, that number is about 65%. So for a lot of students, school is where they get their meals. So why should we deprive them of that when it not only helps, the whole child in your nutrition, but it helps you be a better student?
It is that's something that I am surprised anybody can argue with, right? About kids getting their food. And again, you mentioned in Alex City, over 60% of those students in Alexander City depend on those meals. So, Savannah, I know that we talked about this morning, how people can help. I think you're working on getting some of those resources. But right now, if anybody wants to help, what can they do?
We're working to put those resources together. I know that districts are trying to work with food banks, with churches, community elements. So just reach out to your district, see what you can do, see where they need help. Maybe it's volunteering in a cafeteria or volunteering on a virtual food line. Maybe there's a place for donations, financial donations or food donations. So I would just encourage you to reach out to your district, and we're going to try and put something together soon.
Absolutely. We also have linked your article here for Savannah. So if anybody wants to read a little bit more about what we were talking about, we're putting it here in the comments. And again, we're working on a post, and I should say Savannah is working on a post of those resources where you can help. We will hopefully have that on AL.com soon, and we'll make sure to link it here as well. Savannah, thank you so much for shedding a little light on this topic, breaking it down. It's a hard topic to discuss because there are so many moving parts, but hopefully your reporting is going to get this problem solved sooner rather than later. There are few things worse than hungry kids.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Savannah. Everybody watching, thank you so much. We will see you.